we're kicking off a new series. It's a new year, new us, and we're talking about monsters and love.
Hmm.
Loving
And
monsters.
it is love and monsters, but also it's like society.
Yeah.
Why does society make love harder?
And
What
like
are
who
they
decides who the
doing?
monsters are?
Yeah,
I think that's the big question.
that is the big question. We ask it a lot on the show. We do.
We're going to be covering a Guillermo del Toro film that we have not covered. I have wanted to cover it for a long time. Anyone who listens to Ghouls knows I'm a big Del Toro fan. But we are talking about his film Shape of Water, which is not a horror film overtly.
Yeah.
The way that he creates stuff, it can be pretty horrific, like the circumstances. He has a really great way of softening horrific things to make them digestible and
Hmm.
relatable and beautiful too. I think there's so much beauty in this film. Totally worth all of the awards, all of the attention that he puts in it, in creating
Hmm.
these creatures and um the storyline and the characters that are in there, and it clearly is like a place of love for him. Well, why don't we hop in so we can start this year off with a positive film, a film we enjoy. That's not to say we won't enjoy the other films, we just haven't seen them yet. So
Yeah. And in
uh
this one, we get to see you as a fish, which is great. 10 out of 10.
yes.
Really love the cosplay for those who we get to view Gabe be. So cool.
Yes, if you are listening, check out our YouTube video or just like check out our social media to see me as the specimen. And also leave a comment if you on how you feel about this film. Remember to like and subscribe. You know how it is. It's a new year and we love the support. We'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite Guillermo del Toro film? I'd love to hear
Hmm.
that too. If there's directors like him that you think we should cover, maybe are underrated, also let us know that too.
Yeah.
Happy to hear and to share that. And let's hop in to Shape of Water. So Shape of Water is from 2017, and it's about at a top secret research facility in the 1960s, a lonely janitor forms a unique relationship with an amphibious creature that is being held in captivity, directed by Guillermo del Toro. And yeah, it is that. So, Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water is a mesmerizing fairy tale that shows us that love can transcend language and species. Set in the Cold War era of the 1960s, the story follows Elisa Esposito, a lonely nonverbal woman working as a janitor at a sketchy, top secret government laboratory. She lives her nice life in the sun, and then she goes and works in the seedy underground at night.
Hmm.
And her routine life of small moments of bliss, bookended by this mundanity of labor, takes an extraordinary turn when she discovers a classified experiment. And this secret weapon is actually a mysterious amphibious, hard boiled, egg loving creature captured from the Amazon.
Hmm.
Their moments are super sweet and genuine because they're just connecting on this natural level of being outsiders
Hmm.
in such a like a bland colorless world. Like
Yeah.
Guillermo definitely like desaturates the film a lot, and that's intentional. He originally wanted it to be black and white,
Mm.
but with the color being instead intentional and like what colors pop, the reds that are in there versus like a very blue landscape, like that's all like
Hmm.
really adds to the storytelling and the dim kind of dreary atmosphere of her
Yeah.
life before he showed up. And Eliza forms a deep and unexpected bond with the creature, communicating through sign language and gestures, finding solace in their shared isolation. And she later explains to her good friend Giles that when he looks at me, the way he looks at me, he does not know what I lack or how I am incomplete. He sees me for what I am, as I am. He is happy to see me every time, every day.
Mm.
And when you have like a nonverbal character who speaks in sign language, you kind of we talk about this all the time. You always run that risk of having like this special, differently abled person. I didn't feel
Hmm.
that with her.
No,
That was
yeah.
a part of her, and she was able to talk to him because of that. But it was never like this is the thing that saves him.
Mhm.
It was like her love that saves him, right?
Yeah,
It's like
just the
in
fact she
his
had
love.
empathy.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah.
So I will say that is really nice. And um if you see my video about some of the several mermaid books that I read this year, one of my favorites features the use of sign language to communicate with these aquatic
Mhm.
beings, because there are more than just vocal ways to communicate and share experiences. And that was something I really, really loved about that book. Like it made it stand out. There's
Mhm.
so much I loved about it. But In the Drowning Deep has that aspect to it where there's deaf characters. They felt fully realized. And again, there's like this kind of power of being able to communicate with something that isn't human because
Mhm.
we're using sign language. Like
Yeah.
I use sign language for my dog. So
Yeah.
um people could do it. So as she falls harder for this being who sees her, the government, led by the cruel Colonel Strickland, plans to dissect the creature in the name of science. And Eliza hatches a daring plan to rescue him with the help of her friend Giles, the queer artist neighbor, and Zelda, her supportive and caring coworker bestie. The film focuses on characters who exist on the fringes of society. So you have Eliza, who's a nonverbal woman, Giles, who's a closeted gay man, and Zelda, who's a black woman navigating a racist society, and then the amphibian man, who's a literal outsider. And each of
Mhm.
them faces discrimination and marginalization, yet they find strength in their shared humanity. And the story critiques how society labels and ostracizes those who are different while celebrating the beauty of individuality and acceptance. They're a little cute found family, and I love
Mhm.
them, and I wish I could spend more time with them.
Yeah.
But that's not how it has to be. So
Movies are short.
movies are short, and like they had to go. They had
Yeah.
to get it's he needs
Chaos has
water.
happened. Yeah,
He
yeah,
needs
yeah.
water. It's dry
Yeah.
on land.
Mhm.
But framed by the themes of acceptance, resistance, and the power of connection in the face of oppression, Del Toro offers us a brilliant tale of found family and love, blending romance, suspense, and Del Toro's signature dark whimsy and beautiful practical makeup.
Mhm.
He does a creature well.
Mhm.
The Shape of Water challenges our perception of humanity and monsters, offering a story as enchanting as it is heartbreaking. So, one of the big things I wanted to talk about on this episode and why I really pushed to have uh, this film be covered on the Ghouls is specifically the subversion of the submersive love interest. So, there is
Mhm.
a horror film that is a historic piece of horror media, right? Like it
Yeah.
is like one of the first like ones that it had impact, and that's a creature from the Black Lagoon. But it, like many films of that time, suffered from racism and
Mhm.
otherism because of the time period that it was made in. And you know it's yeah, it's like Birth of the Nation
Yeah.
adjacent.
Yeah, it's
You know?
definitely super problematic. Did not
Yeah.
age well. It was trying to send a message of what people should be scared of that was messed up,
Yeah.
and untrue.
And that,
Yeah.
I mean, that was just the time period. That was the tools that they were using. So
Mhm.
totally get it. Like that that's who those are the people who are making the movies.
Yeah,
So
they were in charge.
when I saw this film and I remember reading a little bit about Del Toro's inspiration, I was like, oh my gosh. Like, for all the monster loving girlies out there,
Yeah.
I know that like monster erotic romance novels are super in. Okay. This is before its time because it's in now, right? But like, there's true romance and it's really sweet and it's cute and it's sexy too, which is
Mhm.
such a weird thing to say about a fish man.
Yeah.
But Del Toro did that, and he wanted to do that and be specific with it. And even if it was just him kind of like nerding out and using his powers for good, it has a really big impact because of its like subversion of
Mhm.
this like profound film that has existed for so long.
Yeah.
So Del Toro's tender love story is wrapped in a deliberate act of cinematic reclamation. It takes the foundation of the 1950s creature features like Creature from the Black Lagoon and flipped their racial and gender anxieties on their heads. Like it's purposeful that it takes
Mhm.
place in the 1950s and that Eliza has such an obsession with movies too.
Mhm.
Because it is her escape, so it's like that's how powerful films were.
Mhm.
Because this isn't just a fishman romance, it's a complete subversion of the tropes that once painted monsters as symbols of racial fear and cultural otherness. Del Toro turned the ethnographical monster into a figure of empathy and love. And in
Mhm.
1950s America, horror movies were often vessels for the era's social anxieties. It always is. So the social anxieties of that time were fears around race, gender, and desegregation. So the creature from the Black Lagoon uses its titular monster known as the Gill Man, as a symbol of evolutionary and racial otherness. He's a hybrid, half human, half fish, stuck in the moment life crawled out of the water. And this hybrid identity taps into fears of racial mixing and the erosion of white purity. And the movie frames the creature as a predator, lurking beneath the surface and threatening white womanhood. Like that's the scene.
Mhm.
That people see and they go, oh, that's scary. But Guillermo del Toro first encountered Creature from the Black Lagoon as a child, and where others saw that horrific scene of this predator like sneaking up from under her, like Jaws level fear, Del Toro saw heartbreak. He describes being mesmerized by the underwater scenes of the creature swimming beneath Julie Adams, saying, "The creature was the most beautiful design I've ever seen. I love that the creature was in love with her, and I felt an almost existential desire for them to end up together." And of course, it didn't happen. So
Mhm.
Del Toro wasn't content to just leave it there. And as a kid, he began sketching stories of the Gill Man finding love, vowing to one day correct the narrative. Now, fast forward to The Shape of Water, and that childhood dream becomes reality in a love story where the monster gets the girl. He was like, he saw it as romantic, that he's like
Mhm.
swimming under her and beautiful, like poetic, right?
Yeah.
Which is just like a total different way to take a scene like that.
Yeah.
And so, in The Shape of Water, Del Toro reclaims the creature archetype and washes away its racialized fear mongering. The amphibian man is no longer a figure of terror or racial othering. Instead, he's a misunderstood being who forms a mutual, loving connection with Eliza, a nonverbal and otherwise marginalized human woman. And this radical
Mhm.
storytelling, one that swaps fear for empathy and alienation for intimacy. So, Eliza doesn't see the amphibian man as a threat. She's just honestly a very nice person.
Yeah.
So,
Empathy.
um, she, like me, will, humanize
Yeah, it was like
anything
when you
that's
text me, I was like,
remotely
I was
human.
yeah, you were like, "I'm worried that when you watch this, you're gonna judge me." And I'm like, "No, I'm with you. I'm with you all the way."
I was
Love
like, "Are you
him.
ready to fall in love with a fish?"
Yeah. And the
'Cause if
answer is
you
yes.
don't,
It's
I
a
might
question
be
of empathy at
suspicious.
that point. Like, I
Yeah.
get, like, you don't have to wanna date him, but you have to at least empathize with him,
Yeah. But then
at the very
they
least.
also made him hot.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just like
both.
how kind he is. I don't know.
Mhm.
So she sees him as someone like herself, isolated, misunderstood, and mistreated by a society obsessed with power and control. And by making the government agents the true villains, Del Toro critiques the colonial, dehumanizing gaze that sought to capture and categorize the creature in the 1950s and in this film. And the
Mhm.
term ethnographiable monster, as used in an article by the University of Colorado Boulder, Race, Gender, and Terror, the Primitive in 1950s Horror Films, Genders, captures the colonialist gaze in 1950s horror. Like King Kong before him, the creature in Black Lagoon was portrayed as an exotic other to be studied, dominated, and ultimately destroyed. The
Mhm.
scientific expedition to capture the creature mirrored real world colonial practices of ethnography, where non Western peoples were displayed as relics of a primitive past. There
Mhm.
was literally people in zoos.
Yep.
There's people zoos. It wasn't just an episode of Futurama or
Yeah.
Steven Universe.
Yep.
Okay. In The Shape of Water, Del Toro turns this narrative inside out because the amphibian man isn't something to be studied or feared. He's someone to be loved. And his difference isn't a threat, it's a source of beauty and connection. And unlike the 1950s film that positioned the monster's desire as predatory, The Shape of Water emphasizes consent, mutual respect, and tenderness. He is not a predator in any form. He only
Mhm.
comes when he is called. She barges in, ready to go, and he stands right up, like it's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, we're
But
in love. It's
up
great.
until then, he's like, I just like it appears he's just very thankful for the kindness that she's showing him. And they are clearly
Mhm.
falling for one another in a very genuine way. But there was never like even as an animal, like the one time he behaves as an animal, like killing a cat, like he didn't behave like an animal in a predatory sense towards humans,
Mhm.
which is like thankfully
Yeah.
a lot of monster romance uh, takes the wrong notes and
Ah.
does that. Because this becomes more than a love story. It is a cultural correction. By allowing the amphibian man and Eliza to find love, Del Toro challenges the historical use of monsters to encode racial and cultural anxieties, and he turns a figure once used to reinforce fear of the other into a symbol of liberation. The amphibian man is a metaphor for the beauty of hybridity, of crossing boundaries, breaking down barriers, and finding humanity in what society deems monstrous. Through his reimagining, Del Toro offers us a vision of love and difference as sources of strength and beauty, not tragedy or fear. And in the
Mhm.
end, young Del Toro finally got his wish, because the monster got the girl.
Mhm.
Um, and this just leads me to just my appreciation of Del Toro, which is why I love Del Toro and his approach to his stories and the
Mhm.
characters that he puts on screen. Like every single thing is intentional and it's beautifully done. And I, you know, you can really appreciate and love someone's work
Yeah.
without like, idolizing and putting anyone on a pedestal, which is not what I'm
Mhm.
doing. But I do want to highlight some of the reasons why I really appreciate his approach to media and the stories that he's told, and why I think it's this delicate tango with trauma. So
Mhm.
seasoned ghouls fans know that I am a huge fan of Del Toro's work. In fact, one of my black tribbles names, we get tribble designations of what we geek out about, and my original name is obviously horror tribble, but when I became an official tribble, my secondary designation was fauna tribble, and that was referencing Del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, which
Mm.
lovingly haunted much of my youth. So I'm a big fan. And I'm in constant awe of not only Del Toro's art, but his ability to turn monsters into sympathetic creatures and humans into vicious monsters. He turns it around.
Yeah.
But also his delicate and honest approach to covering trauma in film overall. Del Toro masterfully weaves trauma into his films, and his approach is as heart wrenching as it is cathartic.
Mhm.
We can experience these moments in time that he's like re-envisioning and making magical,
Mhm.
to kind of soften the blow of what those traumas could be. Also, like the soundtrack haunts me forever from Pan's
Yeah.
Labyrinth.
I remember watching it at my 13th birthday party. Like,
Aw.
that was what we did. We put it on, like, while we were running around.
Yeah, it's one of the only like DVDs I own,
Yeah.
and I owned that in like high school and would watch it all the time. And like I watch TV a lot, and so if movies came on TV, I would watch them all the time. But this was the
Mhm.
one where it was like, I'm purposely putting this
I want
in.
to keep this
And
forever.
I watched
Yeah.
the bonus features. Like I was like, this is what I want to do. Like
Yeah.
watching Pan's Labyrinth, I was like, this is so beautiful. It tickled all of the things that I love.
Mhm.
Um and it was so wonderfully crafted. It was like the storybook opening, and so I it really was inspired me to kind of pursue filmmaking even more
Yeah.
seriously, because I was like, oh, you can just like geek out and make beautiful things and also kind of express things that are troubling you, or historical things as well in
Yeah.
such a beautiful way. So
One
like
day there'll be an
what?
interview of you where
Yeah.
you're like, I was watching Pan's Labyrinth as a child and it inspired me to do this. And then, just like he was saying, BBC movies when I
Hmm.
was young inspired me to do this. And then you'll have that as like your
He'll be my
thing.
creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You hear that, Del Toro? Um, make another season of your show and bring me on as one of the directors.
Don't be dumb.
So Del Toro doesn't just tell personal stories of pain. He roots them in the soil of history, and his films are always set against backdrops of societal upheaval where trauma is both individual and collective. So if you take Pan's Labyrinth, Ophelia's journey happens during the chaos of post Civil War Spain, where fascism tears families apart, and her magical labyrinth is more than an escape, it's her way of processing the violence and terror of her reality.
Hmm.
It's actively happening. And that's really what the horror is. And then on top of that, we're seeing like the pale man, you know?
Mhm.
Similarly, the devil's backbone places orphan children in the crumbling ruins of war-torn institution, their personal grief mirroring the scars of the Spanish Civil War. I also love that he like ties it back. It's
Yeah,
a
he
lot of
loves
like
putting history in
colonial
there.
Spain,
Yeah.
but that's okay. um, by tying individual trauma to historical atrocities, we see how systems like war, fascism, and colonialism leave lasting scars, not just on societies, but on the individuals caught in their wake. And his work is a reminder that trauma doesn't happen in isolation. He also has a knack for focusing on trauma through the eyes of children or marginalized characters. And that juxtaposition of their innocence against the brutality of the world makes their pain hit harder. We
Mhm.
are going to find empathy much more in these people who feel like the most undeserving of that pain.
Yeah.
And that's not to like invalidate like all the other characters who are adults. Like I felt just as strongly for Ophelia's mom and the rebels as I did
Mhm.
for Ophelia.
Yeah.
So think of Ophelia, Carlos from Devil's Backbone, and Eliza from The Shape of Water. These characters endure incredible suffering, yet their stories are marked by resilience. Eliza, for example, doesn't let her nonverbal communication define or limit her. Instead, she transforms her trauma into a source of strength, finding love and connection in a world that tries to silence her. Like the Colonel has that discussion when they see her gills, where he's like,
Mhm.
how could anyone do that to like a child? So it's like clear that she's had like her
Mhm.
foundational years were traumatic, and the fact that she's still like walking around as this like bundle of joy, like she's
Yeah.
just this like beautiful presence, is perseverance, and like it is in itself like an act of rebellion against a
Mhm.
world that is trying to tear her down in other ways. And
Yeah.
so Del Toro emphasizes that these characters aren't victims, right? They're survivors who reclaim their agency even when everything around them feels insurmountable. And in Del Toro's hands, monsters are never just monsters. They're metaphors, complex reflections of the trauma, fear, and humanity's dark impulses. His monsters are often misunderstood or sympathetic, while the humans are the ones committing the real atrocities. They're just
Mhm.
kind of like extra, like it in the way that monsters in like 1950s or classic horror were sometimes used to like monstrosize just people based on being different, like just
Mhm.
monstrosizing entire groups of people by equating them. Instead, he's monstrosizing, like he's using this monster to show like, but the real monsters don't look like that. Like
Yeah.
we need to like actually pay attention,
Mhm.
because they look
There's
like
no
this guy.
static being good,
Yeah.
like, you have to work on yourself, yeah.
Yeah, he was like, You've been told wrong this whole time." And,
Mhm.
like, that's really fun. Like, the
Anyone can
fawn,
be a monster.
from my namesake, Fauna, in Pan's Labyrinth, and the Pale Man, same guy as Shape of Water Man, are
Mhm.
manifestations of Ophelia's internal and external struggles. The amphibian man in the shape of water is a figure of otherness, a being dismissed and dehumanized by society, much like Eliza herself. And even in Crimson Peak, the ghosts haunting the story aren't real. They're embodiments of grief, lingering memories of past violence. Spoilers,
Mhm.
sorry. Also, old film that no one loves and appreciates, but I love
It's
a
okay.
gothic film, period. So,
Yeah.
like, again, would really want to make a gothic film. Anyway, Del Toro flips the script on traditional horror by using monsters not as antagonists, but as vessels for exploring the misunderstood pain that his human characters experience. And while monsters get our sympathy, it is the humans who become the true villains, embodying cruelty, greed, and oppression. The I forget if he's the colonel or what have you in Pan's Labyrinth, but that is like one of the scariest men I've ever experienced in my life. And just when he's just there, like he doesn't have to even
Yeah.
do anything. It's just his presence and that like power and just innate evil
Mhm.
is so much scarier than the Pale
Yeah.
Man. Like I because he believes in the power of imagination and fantasy to cope with trauma. His characters often enter fantastical worlds or relationships to process their pain, reclaiming agency over their lives. So Ophelia's labyrinth is both her escape and her resistance against her stepfather's violence. Eliza's love for the amphibian man allows her to transcend the oppressive boundaries of her life. Even Edith in Crimson Peak transforms a story of betrayal and horror into one of personal strength and survival. Storytelling and imagination aren't just escapism, they're tools for survival, for finding beauty and purpose in even the darkest times. And for Del
Mhm.
Toro, trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. While his characters carry the weight of their pain, they also find paths to healing through connection and empathy. So, in The Shape of Water, Eliza and the amphibian man heal each other through their love and acceptance. He
Mhm.
literally heals her when
Yeah.
they come to terms with who they actually are and are in a place where they can grow. In Devil's Backbone, the children find strength and solidarity, bonding together to face their fears. In Crimson Peak, a tale of betrayal and gothic horror, Edith rises above her trauma with strength and determination. So Del Toro emphasizes that while trauma leaves scars, those scars can be softened through human connection, love, and acts of resistance. And I love Guillermo del Toro's work because he doesn't depict trauma as suffering. He shows it as a transformative force, and his characters are shaped by their pain, but not defined by it.
Mhm.
Instead, they find ways to rise above, to resist, and to heal. And through his monsters, his historical allegories, and his boundless empathy, Del Toro reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is light. There is beauty in the broken. There is hope in the monstrous. So, if you're like me and you've ever felt haunted by Del Toro's work in the best way possible, take a moment to appreciate how his films not only explore the depths of pain, but celebrate the strength it takes to overcome it and
Mhm.
put you into a fairy tale.
Yeah. And it's just like thinking of like everything that's happening in the world is like that's kind of what we need right now, like to
Hmm.
exist. I mean, in most time periods, to exist is stressful, but also right now, to
Yeah,
exist
for
is
sure.
stressful. And we need kind of a little bit of magic to get through it and to process all the traumas that are taking place. So I don't think
Hmm.
films like this will ever cease relevancy.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's always gonna be an other, and it changes who those others are.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the others that are gonna be targeted soon are and have been actively targeted for years now, happen to look like Guillermo del Toro and myself. So
Mhm.
it it does feel very real.
Yeah.
And maybe we're not exoticized, but monstrous.
Mhm.
There's new terms, migrant violence, which isn't
Yeah.
real. Migrant
Yeah.
crime, not a real thing.
Yeah.
No way to determine what that is.
Mhm.
Those kinds of things like that. They've built up a fictional monster while the real monsters look like a guy on TV in a tie.
Mhm. Yep. It's bleh.